Now we are able to put together a number of different pieces of what we've been talking about in the last, I really don't know how many videos, quite a number of videos. You can go back and watch them if you want. The whole process here has been building to a larger understanding, step by step. So we have had a very slow but steady developmental ascent to getting to a type of understanding. So I will now start talking about sort of, you might say, the broader model of consciousness that we will be working with, based on many of the earlier scope and category assignments and scope and category thinking. We might say, call it scope and category philosophy. My first illustration here will be just taking one of those pieces out of the puzzle, and the middle ground we've been talking about, we will now start labeling the ego, which of course is very, very wrong. In NLP does not like that. We're taking a more psychoanalytic term, the ego. But this is kind of what I would say is the middle level of awareness, the kind of awareness we inhabit with no awareness of being aware. And at this point, I will introduce the idea that there are healthy and unhealthy forms of the ego, we might say, or there might be ordered or expanded or broader, more conscious egos, and there might be very constricted egos. So when we talk about the ego often as a problem in Western culture and in modern life, we're often talking about ego disorders of the very constricted ego that has extremely little awareness outside of itself. So we might say the disordered ego is the unconscious ego, the ego that is very self-fascinated with itself as an ego. And it doesn't think much beyond the bounds of the ego. Or we might just call this the standard waking consciousness of a lot of people is in a very narrow, constricted area where there's not any chunking up or not any chunking down or very little chunking up or little chunking down going on. It's just very content and complacent and often stubbornly fixed in this middle place. And a great deal of what will happen in NLP and the NLP process is to open up other vistas. The first vista I'm suggesting we open up to is chunking up here and becoming aware or becoming conscious of what we might say is category thinking. Category thinking, or what we think in terms of, the frames we think in, the generalizations we make. And that's one of the things the meta model exists to do, is to give an ego a path up toward understanding its own way of generalizing and how it frames things. One of the most important pieces of consciousness work we're going to be able to do is to teach the mind to frame differently, or to change the type of frame, or to reframe, or to create a very conscious engagement with the process of thinking. Someone who is coming in the ego-bound or the ego-constricted mind is probably not going to have very much flexibility or very much understanding or even awareness. So for a lot of people, when we're talking about the unconscious, the first step, we might call the sort of unconscious stage one, is the area of categories, terms, frames, generalizations. They're not even aware they're doing that, or they're faintly aware they're doing that, or they're not aware of the consequences of their doing it, or they don't even have a concept for what it means to frame, to think in terms of, to generalize. So I think this is our sort of primary step, okay, to take the ego and expand the ego into allow it to, the ego self, or the ego sense of self, to expand into a realm of the frames and generalizations it's making. And meta-model challenges are one way to do that. There are a lot of other ways to do it. And that allows the disordered or the constricted or the afflicted ego, which is stuck in that little sort of island of self, to start opening up and expanding out and getting into the area of its frames and understanding how it frames and even understand that it is thinking in terms of certain frames and frameworks. Most people who have not been through some kind of philosophical experience or sometimes religious experiences or meditative experiences simply have no consciousness. This is big news to a lot of people, especially if they kind of get it in its full force, that their ego self can start taking in and incorporating the framing self, okay, and the sort of judging self and how we place things. Well, some guy might think, I'm not at all judgmental, or I don't at all press things into certain frames. And then you show them how that's happening, and they're quite surprised and perhaps rather shocked. So that is stage one, okay? That is the first stage, and then we're going to go on to the next stage.